Do you have a child that you're homeschooling who has auditory processing, hearing loss, or maybe just struggles with listening in general? Well, then today you're going to want to stick around because I'm going to be sharing my 5 top tips on how you can help your children succeed, not only in their homeschool day, but all throughout life. So let's get started. The first thing you can do is have your child repeat back to you what you just said. Now, this sounds very simple and maybe a little elementary, but the goal is that we want to do this all throughout for our kids who struggle with hearing or listening. So when you're giving them a spelling word, it's imperative that you have them repeat back the spelling word before they start to spell anything. I can't tell you how many times with my son with auditory processing where I have said a word and then he repeats it back and I realize he didn't hear the ending of the sound, or his brain didn't process all of the information. It did a word association game and picked a different word. So it's important to be able to say the word, say it in a sentence, and then have them repeat back the word before you actually go into writing it. Another thing that I have found to be very helpful, depending on the child, is to have them repeat back instructions when it comes to any task within school or within your home. But not just to repeat back, what did mom ask you to do? She asked me to put away my clothes, something like that. You're going to also have them work on visualizing what you're asking them to do. So for my son with auditory processing in particular, 3-step commands can still be a challenge even in the teens because it can be easy for that information to get mixed up and have it be really confusing. So what I have him do is I give him instructions, but as I give them, I have him visualize and think through those things. So I say, hey, I need you to go up in my room. Can you close your eyes and picture that for a minute? And he does that. And I said, okay, can you go to the bookshelf next to my bed? Can you see the bookshelf? What are some of the things that are on that bookshelf? And he can tell me. Say, okay, in the right corner, can you grab this book for me and bring it downstairs? And he'll think about it. And I'll say, okay, repeat it back. And I will watch him and he is visually going through that process and then repeating it back to me. Now, for some kids, this does not work. This is not at all how my brain works or functions, but especially if you have kids who have auditory processing or struggles with listening, this might be something that can be really helpful to reinforce and help them to be able to actually accomplish what you've asked them to do. Again, whether in school or just day-to-day tasks. When it comes to repeating back what they've just heard, I think it's imperative that we also do this when it comes to readings. Now, it's very common in the homeschool world to talk about narrations, where we read our history or our read aloud. We finish the chapter and we ask our children to repeat back in their own words what they heard. This is a great exercise, but for those who struggle in these areas, that can be way too much information to try to summarize and process. So I recommend breaking it down. If you're reading out of a textbook and it's kind of broken up into chunks, like a paragraph or a couple paragraphs at a time, have them narrate and repeat back what they heard after each section instead of after the entire day's reading. Also, be aware of the difference between repeating back word for word what they heard and being able to paraphrase. When your child is able to paraphrase what they heard, that means that they have heard the information, they've processed information, they understand the information, and they can give it back to you in a way that makes sense. If all they can do is repeat verbatim, word for word what you said, but they didn't really understand the meaning behind that information, that's also a problem. So when we have our kids repeat back to us what they've heard, what they're learning, those kinds of things, it helps give us an idea, a pulse, so to speak, on what they're picking up on and what we might need to go back and repeat. The second thing is to use visuals. This can be written or it can be with pictures, but it is really important because when our body struggles with one of the senses, it will oftentimes compensate by using one of the other senses. So by using those visuals, it helps compensate for maybe the struggle or the loss that there is with hearing and can help your child be able to focus better and reduce frustration. For example, using video-based lessons or using videos to reinforce your lessons can be a great way to offer a visual component so that your child is not completely dependent on an auditory process. This could look like watching a YouTube video on something you just read about in history or science. This could be things like, again, incorporating curriculums that already have videos built in. This is a great way to give them visuals in their homeschool and is really an easy and a free resource oftentimes. Another helpful tool is graphic organizers. Things like flowcharts, things like graphs within a textbook, things like globes, maps, Anything like this that takes the information and organizes it in a visual way is a great way to reinforce anything that is being taught auditorily. Encourage your child to take notes or even consider providing notes for more complicated information. So having your child giving them some notes in their hands, and then they can add to it or look over it or read through it as you are teaching them or someone else is teaching them, can be a helpful tool. You can also color code information or teach your child how to color code information. Like for instance, highlighting all the dates in purple and putting all the names in yellow or whatever it might be, to help them be able to quickly identify and have that visual reinforcement for the information. For younger learners, this can also be involved as having a lot of pictures and being able to show them those visual pictures of what you're expecting of them, having spelled out for them the different steps that you want them to take within a task, or even a visual schedule for your homeschool. I actually have several of those in my Etsy store that you guys can check out. I'll leave a link down in the description below, but those are kinds of things that can help give them extra reinforcement. The third thing that I think is oftentimes overlooked is thinking about your space. Is your space conducive for a child who needs extra assistance when it comes to listening, being able to hear, and being able to process information? How is your space when it comes to sound absorption? I neglected to think about this when my daughter, who has moderate to severe hearing loss, was a baby. She had a therapist come to her house and she said, "Hey, do you notice you have hardwood floors? You have no curtains, not a whole lot of furniture." We had a little bit more minimalist feel in that room at the time. So there wasn't a lot to absorb the sound, but there was a lot of opportunities for echoing to happen or sound to be carried throughout that room. This meant there was going to be a lot of extra white noise happening around and going to make it quite challenging for my daughter to be able to hear when we were doing different instructions or just even talking. So adding curtains, a throw rug, an extra piece of furniture, or some carpet could be something that could help you make your space a little more conducive for your kids who are having more trouble with hearing. Also consider who is in the room when you're teaching subjects, especially those subjects that are more tricky or difficult for your child. Maybe reducing the amount of distractions that are coming in and out of the room, or scheduling just those really hard subjects during younger kids' nap times, or taking the opportunity to work on something in the evening when maybe a spouse can take the other kids away. Creating a quiet zone or quiet corner or room in your home can also be helpful if your child needs a place to get away to be able to focus on studying and learning without distractions. Another thing we oftentimes don't think of as homeschooling parents, but is really important, is preferred seating. Now, if you came from the public school or private school realm, you probably have heard this term, and that's the idea that kids who need a little extra help may need to have preferred seating, sitting closer to the teacher, closer to the board, to be able to hear the instructions better or to be able to keep up and not have all those distractions. We as homeschooling parents are like, we're in a classroom of 1 or maybe 6 kids. They don't need preferred seating. That's not true. When you're reading aloud, especially for myself, I found that when I was reading aloud, I was reading to a whole living room of kids. And I realized that there was definitely a big difference between the kids that were sitting the furthest point away from me and those who were sitting closer. So by bringing your kids who maybe have a few more struggles a little bit closer to yourself, or maybe to go over and sit next to them, would actually be helpful as well. The fourth tip is to use assistive technology. Obviously, if your child is in need of hearing aids, that's something that could be very helpful. It can be helpful, obviously, if you have a child with hearing loss, but also sometimes with a child who has auditory processing. For my son, that was not going to be something that was going to be helpful to him, but for my daughter, she does have hearing aids. Making sure that you have them, that they're in good working order, that you have batteries and things is definitely a huge part of helping them be successful in school. But that's not the only kind of assistive technology that you can use. We use a voice amplification system that I just got off of Amazon. It's not horribly expensive. It helps to save my voice and helps to make sure I'm amplifying my voice well and evenly for my kids who need that extra volume, that extra clarity in what I am saying. And if using visuals in your homeschool or videos, turn on closed captioning. Giving your kids the ability to read and listen at the same time can be helpful. And if you have kids that are too young to be reading and you think, oh, they can't do it, you'd be surprised how much they can pick up on by keeping the closed captioning on the videos, and even how much it'll help you as a parent as well. The fifth and final tip, probably the most important, is to adjust your pacing and check for understanding regularly. Kids who oftentimes have trouble hearing, whether it's for a medical reason or they just struggle with focus, are oftentimes going to learn how to fake it until they make it. They're going to learn to look engaged and to be able to answer just enough questions to make you think they've got it without really making sure that they understand, which can cause so much hardship later on in life. So avoid covering large amounts of information at one time. Pause frequently to check for understanding. Don't be afraid to give extra explanation. One thing I see oftentimes with kids who have struggles with hearing is that we can tend to give a lot of information, ask a question, and when they don't know the answer to that question, we can just kind of put them in this awkward spot of needing to answer it. There's nothing wrong with us paraphrasing the information, making sure they have better understanding there, and then asking them the question again. It's not cheating, it's just another way of reinforcing what we've already taught. Break your instructions into smaller steps. So whether you give just one step of instruction at a time, hey, can you go get your math book and take it to the table? Or maybe even just, can you get your math book? Okay, now that you have it, take it to the table. Or breaking down bigger projects into smaller steps can also be helpful. Ultimately, we want to be patient and kind with our kids, understanding that many of these things can take much longer for them to do or be harder because of struggles that they have. They are super smart and can do almost anything your other kids can do, but they do need adaptations and tools and helps to come alongside them. If you enjoy learning more about homeschooling kids with special needs, be sure to come and join me in my homeschooling community, Made to Homeschool. I talk a lot about homeschooling special needs in that area, and I would love to have you there. And if you want to learn more about some tools you can use with kids who are highly distracted and have ADHD, be sure to check out this video here.